I grew up in Brookshore, the kind of place where the morning smell of wet pine and the lake holds the low light like a secret. My name is Caleb Mercer. At 72, the town has the same narrow lanes, the same bakery near the post office, and the same shoreline I have watched since boyhood. Miriam and I built our life by habit and hand. A small furniture shop, a handful of customers who became friends, and later a modest restaurant with a view that coaxed people into slowing down. She had a patience that stained everything she touched, and she believed in the little things with a fervor that often embarrassed me into trying harder. I learned woodworking when I was 17 and married her at 21, and together we made things that carried our fingerprints. Her absence changed the house in ways I did not expect. The cabin felt too big, the kitchen quieter, the hallways full of echoes that kept asking why there was only one cup on the drying rack now. I keep Miriam's apron on the peg because taking it down would feel like erasing her. Our children grew in different directions. Sterling found his stride in business, loud, quick, always looking for the next advantage. Asher moved quietly through seasons of odd jobs, soft-eyed and unreliable, never quite finding a place that fit his hands or his heart. Alina, Sterling's wife, keeps a distance of manners that never quite meets warmth. After Miriam died, I tried to hold the family together, but I often felt like a guest in my own life. I invited them for suppers they avoided. At family gatherings, my voice felt like a draft that slipped through a room unnoticed. Aging is a teacher with strict lessons. It shows you neglects you did not know existed. The day Harold Bryant arranged for the estate reading, the sky was heavy and low over the lake. I drove in early. The quiet in the cabin had become too thick to bear. Harold's office sat between the old library and the bakery that still smelled like daytime sugar. Inside, Sterling paced. Alina scrolled with that polite, precise attention of someone who was already elsewhere, and Asher folded his hands and looked at the floor. Harold read the will with the ease of someone who organizes endings for a living. Sterling was named heir to the restaurant chain and several commercial properties. Asher received the furniture shop and what remained of the operating assets. When Harold said my name, I felt an odd hope, but it was brief. He handed me a slim envelope with edges yellowed by time, and the weight in my palm felt nearly nothing. Sterling leaned back like a man who had been set right. Alina let out a small laugh that landed like a cut. I drove home with the envelope and a quiet that had nothing to do with the road. The lake looked darker, and the cabin seemed to wait with its breath held. That night I opened the envelope and found Miriam's handwriting, careful and small. Inside were instructions, a key taped to the corner, and numbers that led to a bank beyond our shores. I held that paper until the house seemed to remember who it was. The words Miriam wrote were more than a list. They were a map and a warning. What Miriam hid was a shield, and it would force me to decide what to do with the life she protected. The list in Miriam's hand read, like an argument written in numbers and addresses. She had a way of making order from the smallest things, and the folders she left matched that precision. There was a key, a note pointing to a safe deposit box at the community bank, and a set of foreign account numbers that made my breath stop. For years, she had quietly kept ledgers and letters, filing away realities I had never thought to look for. The next evening I took the key to the bank, the world outside moving with ordinary indifference, and the teller led me to the vault, as though easing me into another life. The metal box was cold where Miriam had arranged its contents with the same care she used to fold cloth. Inside were folders, separated like chapters. The first folder named Sterling and showed a string of loans and transactions I had never authorized, lines of debt tied to the business in ways that made my hands go numb to hold the paper. The second folder laid out medical notes, prescriptions, and a trail that spoke of a hidden dependence. Asher's injuries had led to medications that became chains. The third folder was the straw that broke something I had hoped was unbreakable, correspondence, drafts, and a forged signature suggesting that Alina had spoken with an attorney about ways to control my affairs, conservatorship petitions drafted months before Miriam died. Words fail when they try to describe the cold wind that blows through you when trust fractures. I sat under the vault's harsh lights and played a small digital recording Miriam had saved. Her voice was soft on the playback. She sounded like the Miriam I remembered, steady, practical, loving, but the content of her words carried grief and calculation. She had been afraid that grief would make me vulnerable. She had been quietly collecting evidence to protect me from those closest by blood. The days that followed blurred into precise actions. I contacted Sandra Whitmore, an attorney in town known to champion older people who had been taken advantage of. Sandra listened to the folders with a careful intensity and agreed to help. She lined up a forensic accountant, drew up emergency legal filings to block any attempt at a quick conservatorship, and began tracing the money that had been rerouted from the businesses we built. I felt, for the first time in a long while, a steadiness return to my chest. Doing small legal tasks, signing papers, arranging security around the cabins. These actions were like the steady plane of a sanded board, making a surface that could hold weight again. Sandra's presence felt like a pair of steady hands, and the accountant's reports started to stitch facts to the fears Miriam had recorded. My sons responded in predictable ways. Sterling called repeatedly. I let him ring. Alina sent notes with that polite cruelty that pretends to worry while quietly building a narrative to justify theft. Asher fell silent. In the quiet of mornings, I watched the lake and let the revelation settle. I thought of Miriam and her quiet competence. I thought of the life she had built and the way she'd protected me with knowledge she had hoarded like a gift. The evidence Miriam left would not only expose betrayals, it would demand confrontation. When Sandra filed emergency motions and arranged protective monitoring for the cabin, the world tightened around us. I hired a private service to keep a record of visitors and to watch the driveway at night. Sterling attempted to justify transactions by saying he was fixing things, that liquidity had been necessary. Alina suggested gently that I could not be left to manage alone. They tried, subtly at first, to make my confusion appear plausible. They came to my door with thin smiles and forms, attempting to mask an agenda in kindness. One afternoon they arrived together, Sterling, Alina, and a man in a doctor's white coat who carried a clipboard and a demeanor practiced in soft coercion. He spoke slowly, as though my brain needed to be persuaded piece by piece, and produced documents that framed a narrative of a man past his capacities. He emphasized protection, a conservatorship that would give them control under the suggestion of my own inability. I had expected the possibility of confrontation, but their calm made the attempt more bitter. I had prepared. I set my phone so it would record without making a scene, placed the recording device where it would catch every word, and waited. As the doctor's questions veered toward testing my awareness, Sterling's face hardened and Alina moved through the cabin like a guest already certain of her welcome. When they offered papers and asked for my signature, I reached for the phone and held it out. The room's atmosphere shifted like weather. Their composure slipped. I showed them folders. I laid out Sterling's unauthorized transactions, the documentation of leverage and loans he had placed using corporate assets, and the forged conservatorship drafts that bore my name. I played Miriam's recording that explained why she had left evidence. She feared grief's shadow and wanted me to stay free of manipulation. As the recording played, the confident faces paled. Police arrived. Sandra had filed protective requests and anticipated their move. The doctor, who had looked every inch the professional gentle helper, left with an officer. Sterling and Alina were questioned at the driveway. Asher arrived shortly after, eyes rimmed in red, hands shaking. When he saw the folders and the look on my face, something in him broke. He walked to me like a man returning from a long wrong turn, and his apology was small and raw. He had been drowning, he said, and had not known how to ask for help. That moment, when a boy who once followed me into the workshop with sawdust in his hair reached for my hand, softened something in my chest. There was betrayal, yes, and shattering consequences. But there was also a human failure that had been hidden under shame. The officers escorted Sterling and Alina away to answer questions. Asher stayed behind, and I felt the curious tilt of compassion and justice balancing in the room. In the evenings that followed, I walked the shoreline, thinking of what the rest of my life might look like. Sandra recommended structural reforms, better governance for the businesses, oversight for financial officers, and a foundation that would channel resources toward helping seniors protect themselves from exploitation. The blueprint made sense in a way that felt like cedar-scented boards aligning under a plan. Building the future would require daring, and the courage to turn pain into purpose. The court hearing stretched over months, like a slow tide. Evidence was reviewed, signatures scrutinized, and the forensic accountant laid bare a trail of transfers that had been disguised as routine business decisions. Sterling's position eroded as the facts accumulated. Loans taken without board consent, collateral assignments executed without my approval, and withdrawals that served personal appetites more than company needs. It was painful to learn the scope of what had been done in the name of growth. Yet in the exposure there was also clarity. The company's books were messy but salvageable. At the same time, Asher entered a treatment program. Rehabilitation is a quiet, stubborn thing. Days of small victories, admissions, and work on habits that had become life-sized obstacles. Watching him come back to himself was like watching a table be reshaped. Rough edges planed, joints tightened, a return to something useful and honest. He began to show up at the workshop, timid at first, then with tools in hand, and I noticed an old muscle memory return in his careful measuring and subtle, steady hands. I took control of the businesses with Sandra's legal scaffolding, supporting each move. New checks and balances were instituted, a management team reformed, and a board of advisors consulted on strategic decisions so no single person could divert funds or leverage assets without scrutiny. The restaurant chain regained its focus on community and customer care. The furniture shop returned to a rhythm where apprenticeship and craft mattered again. But a broader idea started to live inside me, one Miriam would have loved. We had seen the ease with which an elder could be targeted, forged papers, quiet coercion, and financial maneuvering that stripped dignity along with assets. The foundation I conceived would shield others as Miriam had tried to shield me. We would educate, provide legal aid, and offer rapid response support for older adults who face sudden, predatory moves by those they trusted. Naming it after Miriam felt right. The Miriam Mercer Foundation for Senior Independence would focus on prevention as much as recovery. Financial literacy programs, community advocates, legal clinics, and emergency grants to secure housing and medical care when exploitation upended lives. Building the foundation became my new work. Hiring staff, setting policies, and meeting older people who had stories like mine. Quiet betrayals that had left them isolated. Sterling, after legal consequences and time working under supervision, started his own slow reckoning. He came back to the workshop to learn the honest labor I had always prized, and there, among sawdust and discussions about measurement and intention, humility began to replace the edges of entitlement. Asher continued his recovery, finding steadier footing with each day. In the end, what sustained me through the court dates and late nights of paperwork wasn't the money or the lawsuits. It was the sense that Miriam's meticulous caution had been an act of love, and that the life she had left behind could be reformed into something that protected the vulnerable. The foundation's launch would test everything I had rebuilt, and it would demand that I lead with both firmness and mercy. When the foundation opened its doors, the town turned out in a way that surprised me. People who had eaten in our restaurant for years, nurses, retired teachers, contractors, came to offer help, donate, and volunteer. The launch felt like a small harvest for seeds Miriam had planted long ago. My speeches were short. I spoke mostly about dignity and protection, and about how easy it is for trust to be weaponized when someone's grief or decline is used against them. In the crowd, Sterling sat quiet and distant at first, then stayed later than I expected, and after the event he found me and said, simply, he was sorry. The foundation's programs were practical. We taught elders how to spot financial coercion, provided free consultations with elder rights attorneys, and partnered with local banks to institute safeguard flags for suspicious transactions. We trained volunteers to check in on neighbors and to spot signs of isolation that often preceded exploitation. The work felt immediate. Calls came in from nervous children who suspected something, from seniors who had been rushed into signing papers, and from caretakers who felt outmatched by slick operators. I learned to balance the business duties of the companies with the mission of the foundation. The restaurant needed a management team that would protect employees and profits. The furniture shop required attention to apprenticeship and fair accounting. Hiring wise people, Those who respected oversight and ethics became central. We restructured reporting so that no single person could move funds without a system of checks. This not only repaired past breaches, but also restored a culture of accountability. Asher's return to the fold was gradual but genuine. He signed up for design projects, began sketching affordable housing layouts, and worked to integrate practical solutions into our philanthropic mission. He brought a quiet creativity that fit the foundation's goals, building safe, affordable units for seniors who had been financially abused, cleared a path for those who needed both shelter and dignity. Sterling's path was harder. His hands needed the humility of labor and the lessons of accountability. He started carrying lumber, learning payroll, and seeing firsthand how a business cannot rely on charisma alone. He wrote checks he was accountable for and sat in meetings where he had to explain past decisions. Watching him chip away at his pride felt like watching varnish come off old wood, the real grain underneath revealed. At night I would sit by the lake, sorting through letters from people the foundation had helped, messages of thanks, brief notes about small recoveries. Miriam's handwriting haunted me sometimes in the house, but there was also a sense that what she had left was not merely a cache of numbers, but a charge to act. The foundation's early triumphs were measured in modest things. A woman kept in her home because we froze suspicious transfers, a husband reunited with his wife after a quick intervention, a neighbor who regained confidence after attending a workshop. These small victories built a pattern of hope that felt tangible. The work also made me younger in some strange way. Responsibility, when it leads to purpose, can restore appetite. The foundation's work would soon encounter a test that no policy could fully anticipate, a betrayal. Not all threats arrive with clear paperwork. Some come wrapped in loyalty, in family histories that fracture under pressure. Months after the foundation opened, a new complication surfaced. A senior housing project we planned to develop as a foundation initiative attracted investor interest from people who praised our mission publicly, but had private motives. They offered capital and connections, and for a time their involvement seemed like a boon we could not refuse. Their terms, though, included clauses that would have ceded operational control to outside managers and layered complex financial instruments that pushed long-term risk onto the residents we meant to protect. Sandra warned against those terms. She had seen the language of predatory capital before. It dresses itself in philanthropy. I was tempted. The funds could accelerate building safe units for elders, but the foundation existed to safeguard, not to entangle vulnerable people in schemes that promised generosity while extracting profit. We declined the offer. The refusal produced pushback, whispered criticisms, a smear campaign in a local column, suggesting the foundation was mismanaged, and a rash of calls from people who believed the insinuations. The smear stung because it misrepresented our work. It suggested incompetence where there was caution, and it questioned motives that had always been transparent. We responded with facts, with audited statements, and with testimonials from people we had helped. But the episode taught me that public trust is fragile, and that some attempts to help are actually Trojan horses. At the same time, the companies required constant attention. The restaurant chain demanded strategic planning to adapt to shifting markets, while the furniture shop sought to expand its apprenticeship program to give skilled work to those re-entering the workforce after addiction treatment. I found myself dividing days between executive meetings and foundation strategy sessions, and the rhythm stabilized into a new normal. Mornings for community work, afternoons for business, evenings for paperwork, and the small rituals that keep a house together. Asher's designs for affordable housing gained traction. He worked with architects and planners, insisting on units that were accessible, dignified, and affordable, spaces that did not feel institutional but human. His dedication became a quiet, powerful testimony to recovery. The man who once relied on pills now pushed for structural solutions to keep others from falling into the same traps. Sterling's rehabilitation continued in public. He faced legal consequences and was required to participate in restitution plans. He took training in ethical business practices and attended community meetings, where he listened rather than spoke. I saw him change in small increments. The arc of that work was slow and often uncomfortable, but it moved him steady enough for me to believe in repair. We celebrated small policy wins, with the same care we used to celebrate a well-made chair. A new bank partnership agreed to flag suspicious elder accounts. An online course helped families spot predatory tactics. Each win was not dramatic but meaningful, and they accumulated into something resilient. Just as stability seemed to settle, a personal letter arrived that would reopen old grief and demand decisions I had not expected to make. The letter arrived on a wet morning, stamped and folding in on itself with news that jolted me back into the earliest griefs. It was from a distant relative with information about Miriam's earlier years, details that painted parts of her past in new light, and with them came documents that clarified why she had been so methodical in hiding resources. Her early life had been harder than I knew. She had learned, young, that security comes from quiet planning. The revelation did not change my love for her, but deepened my gratitude. The woman who had sewn quilts and kept accounts had been quietly securing us against storms I had not imagined. I spent the winter working with the foundation and the companies, and in the evenings I returned to the workshop to feel the plane of wood under my hand. Craft keeps you honest. Measurements matter, as do joints, glue, and patience. The workshop became a refuge, a place where repairs are literal and metaphorical. Asher and I designed furniture that would be sold to fund foundation projects. Apprentices came through the doors, learning skills and earning wages. Sterling continued to rebuild trust by doing the humbler jobs he had once sneered at. He learned payroll, inventory, and how to speak with staff who had nothing to do with boardrooms. Watching him sweat over simple responsibilities softened my anger in ways that surprised me. He showed up, day after day, and gradually the edges of his old hunger wore down into something steadier. The foundation's reach grew. We placed advocates in emergency rooms to help elders who were rushed into decisions, partnered with banks to create safe transaction protocols, and worked with local media to run educational segments that normalized conversations about financial abuse. The Miriam Mercer Foundation became, in the small geography of our county, a place people trusted to act quickly when a quiet crisis threatened a neighbor. The most surprising gift, though, was a letter tucked into an old quilt, a small sealed envelope in Miriam's hand. Her note spoke plainly about strength and mercy walking together, and about forgiveness earned rather than freely given. It asked if I ever needed to, I would lead with both firmness and forgiveness. The instruction felt like a benediction and a task. I thought of the men and women we had helped, of Asher's recovery, of Sterling's slow work to earn his place again, and of moments when the foundation's small interventions saved dignity. Sure, one evening I watched the lake darken, the water holding the sky like a mirror. I felt a peace that was work-made, not accidental. The life Miriam and I had built was not the same as before, and much had been lost. But what remained, work, craft, a mission to protect others, had given shape to the years yet to come. I stood there thinking that dignity can be damaged but also restored, that care can be taught, and systems can be built, so that elders are not easy prey. In the echo of Miriam's handwriting and the lives we had saved, I found a future worth stewarding. The road ahead would be long, but the work we started would keep people safer than the secrecy that once tried to protect me alone.